My name's Jo Wade and I'm a stakeholder engagement consultant here at Emperor. Joining me today from the Emperor team are Leon Milligan, stakeholder engagement consultant, Sue Francis, sustainability consultant, and Daryl Mead, head of our employee experience offer. So we're delighted today to present the findings from our annual First 25 research project. Each year we review 25 of the first annual reports to be released from the FTSE 350. And this year we've broadened our review to look not only at the annual report, but also to encompass those companies reporting and comm suites more broadly, to highlight the synergies between these areas that are so often reviewed in isolation. So, unusual times, usual reporting? Well, we're clearly living in unusual times, and as a result, reports do look a little different this year. But more than that, alongside rising consciousness and debate around global issues such as climate change and social injustice, the pandemic really has heightened awareness of the link between society and the corporate world. So, although sustainability has been a topic of discussion for many years, this year really does seem to have signalled a milestone on this long and eventful sustainability odyssey and created a perfect storm for sustainability, placing it firmly on the agenda and potentially changing the balance of focus forever. So we've grouped our findings under the following 6 broad thematic areas, and we've highlighted a number of observations in each area. And what's interesting to me is the fact that these topic areas are applicable to all aspects of business. They're business critical issues and can and should not be considered as reporting or sustainability issues in isolation. So our first theme centres on business continuity. Now, as somebody who had their first child just a couple of weeks into the first lockdown, I can certainly attest to the adaptability and agility of the NHS, who were literally changing their procedures on a daily, if not hourly basis at the start of the pandemic in order to maintain business continuity. And it was no different for companies. As businesses navigated these crazy, unprecedented times, many have had to scramble to respond and demonstrate agility in order to remain open for business. So it was really a true test of business continuity plans, but more so a test of business purpose and values and their commitment to their stakeholders, not just shareholders. So our first theme centres on the fact that in response to COVID, companies have obviously had to focus on adaptation, but perhaps more interestingly, it's also driven companies to demonstrate greater empathy. And it's been interesting to see how this has translated into reporting. We've noticed a distinct shift in subject matter and tone towards companies communicating in a more honest and transparent way, which is manifested through a range of approaches. Beazley, for example, include a frank and honest Q&A with its CEO discussing the challenges and opportunities presented by the pandemic. Others have used video to support their reporting message, leading CEOs and in some cases the wider executive team to become much more visible. And where leadership have been forced to present directly from their homes, this has helped to break down barriers and show a more human side to management. Now, whether this is a direct result of this or otherwise, it's really interesting to note that the Edelman Trust Barometer this year placed businesses as the most trusted institutions, ahead of governments, media, and NGOs. So the subject of the narrative has also evolved, with companies focusing on how they've responded and adapted to ensure the safety and well-being of the stakeholders, specifically their workforce and customers, but also communities more broadly. And in doing this, companies have shown a more empathetic side. Again, they've approached this in a range of ways, with many including a dedicated section illustrating key actions undertaken as a response to COVID. For example, Hiscox, in this example, set out their stakeholder-focused response upfront, here highlighting how they've worked to ensure customer needs remain fulfilled. And Anglo American go further to include a dedicated COVID hub on their website. And as part of this, they explain how they've set up a community-focused health awareness and support programme called We Care. I doubt there's a company out there that hasn't been forced to adapt their ways of working over this time in some way or other. But what was also positive was to see companies embracing these changes, with a vast proportion of the global workforce being forced to work from home. This obviously presented challenges, but many companies acknowledge the positives and discuss how they will not return to business as usual, instead embedding change for the future. A really nice example of this was from Smith & Nephew, whose chief HR officer actually explains how the pandemic prompted a rethink of their ways of working and accelerated their existing strategy towards flexible working. Another focus area for companies was how they'd adapted and responded to protect customers and continue to fulfil their needs during this time. For example, William Hill here includes some detailed narrative regarding its responsible gambling practices, with a particular focus on how they've responded to protect those that were even more vulnerable than usual during this challenging time. Another business consideration that couldn't fail to be affected by the pandemic was the subject of risk management. And pleasingly, the majority of our sample demonstrated dynamic risk management processes through their disclosure, with 96% actually showing how COVID had impacted their other principal risks, rather than purely including COVID as a standalone risk. An effective example to show how risk information can be brought to life can be seen here from Howdens, who summarises its COVID risk response on the right of the page in an infographic that's easy to digest, whilst also supporting it with detailed disclosures against each principal risk. We also saw some examples of companies bringing risk management discussion to life. For example, this narrative from Beazley's Chief Risk Officer focuses firmly on its workforce, identifying and commenting on the risk to their well-being while people work from home, as well as highlighting other operational risks linked to this, such as cybersecurity. Again, this places the idea of companies showing greater empathy and understanding. This example from Evras also helps to make risk management processes more tangible for the lay reader by including a short case study to explain how, having identified workforce sickness as a key risk to production, they address this by rolling out an app to alert workers of potential infection and prevent transmission of the disease. As you might expect, we also noticed a significant number of companies referring to process overhaul in this area. And it was encouraging to see that over half of the companies commented on the fact that they had updated their risk management processes as a result of the pandemic, which shone a light on the importance of this function. And this is a trend that's supported by anecdotal feedback from clients regarding a greater focus on risk management at board level. And now I'm going to pass over to Leon to talk about our findings in relation to stakeholder value creation.
Thanks, Jo. Our second trend focuses on the area of stakeholder value creation, where this year we've seen a growing trend towards purpose being put into action. 92% of companies now clearly state their purpose in their annual report, up from 57% just 2 years ago, showing that compliance requirements really are driving change in this area. But it's pleasing to note that this seems to be more than a compliance exercise, with it becoming more commonplace for companies to embed their purpose narrative throughout their communications. 78% of companies now explain their purpose in the context of their stakeholders, and some link it to other aspects of narrative such as strategy or culture of the business. In this example from Admiral, they unpack their purpose statement, explaining in an understandable way what it means for different groups of people and how it applies to their products. They also show how the different elements of their corporate narrative fit together to deliver their purpose-led approach. Others take a less formal approach and demonstrate the business impact for wider society through other ways. For example, AstraZeneca uses a detailed case study suite to illustrate how its purpose creates value for stakeholders. While companies are generally embedding their purpose within their disclosure more cohesively this year, there's still room for better disclosure at board level. In fact, only 56% of our sample discuss purpose meaningfully in the governance section. And it often seems that boards are keener to communicate on purpose when it is new or in development. For example, Agreco do a great job of explaining why and how its new purpose was developed in the year, setting out the process they undertook and the value it brings. But we hope that they'll continue to report its success in coming years. Despite the UK Corporate Governance Code requirement to explain how purpose aligns to and supports the delivery of strategy, disclosure in this area we found was still a little bit patchy. In general, the increased focus on purpose and acting for the common good also plays to another theme we've seen, of companies telling their story through a stakeholder lens. Despite this Section 172 requirement being about board level engagement, only 8% focused entirely on this, with 84% of companies going further and also outlining their stakeholder engagement processes at an operational level, in addition to doing it at board level. As part of this approach, they include a stakeholder KPI-centric dashboard and set out a balanced set of measures across the group linked to directors' remuneration. However, the extent that companies do this and the measures that they use vary wildly, with a number of objectives not necessarily linked to hard targets. Instead, somewhat vague non-financial measures and ambitions are included, with personal objectives being loose and unclear, and often at the discretion of the remuneration committee. In addition to linking non-financial metrics to reward, there are a few that take this further, linking purpose through to reward. Anglo-American build on disclosure from previous years and include a purpose to reward graphic. This highlights how all elements of their business link together and shows that its purpose ultimately drives everything that they do. And AstraZeneca's first two strategic pillars of accelerate innovative science and therapy area leadership clearly influence executive directors' bonuses, while also overtly supporting its purpose of pushing the boundaries of science and delivering life-changing medicines. In both cases, these companies benefit from very clear and distinctive purposes, which help to facilitate the strong linkage that we find. And now I'll hand over to Sue to talk us through our next section.
Thanks, Liam. Our third area focuses on responsible business. And our key outtake from reviewing the first 25 reports is that sustainability issues are, at last, being given the appropriate level of attention by companies, given their intrinsic impact on business imperatives today, and is the reason why we've called this year's analysis Navigating the Sustainability Odyssey. A clear indicator of this trend is the number of companies focusing on sustainability and ESG issues in the governance section of their report, demonstrating that ESG is now firmly on board agendas. We found that 52% of the companies we reviewed have a board committee dedicated to some aspect of sustainability. In addition, a large number of companies also talk about internal working groups dedicated to such topics at an operational level. These groups then feed into board or subcommittee discussions. Something that has also been building for a number of years and is a clear trend is the fact that many companies now also place sustainability strategy on equal footing with corporate strategy. Lloyds Banking Group, for example, have this year set out a new set of priorities focused on enhancing its operational capabilities, such as becoming more data-driven and improving integrated payments. Yet firmly alongside this, they have repositioned their purpose of helping Britain prosper under the heading of helping Britain recover, setting out clear goals focused on their social impact under 5 areas such as personal financial health and expanding availability of affordable and quality homes. This is essentially an amalgamation of traditional corporate and sustainability strategies and shows a holistic strategic approach. Other companies fully integrating sustainability into a unified strategy include Unilever, who place its purpose to make sustainable living commonplace at the centre of its new Compass strategy. As part of this, they then set out 8 sustainability objectives, targeting key areas such as climate action and improving people's health. Whilst the companies we've discussed today have been on this journey for some time, others, less mature, are following suit. there wasn't a single company in the sample that isn't putting significant focus on sustainability or emphasising the need to do more. No doubt, helping to drive sustainability agenda forward, as well as achieve consistency, is the number of companies now aligning to SDGs and other sustainability-focused frameworks. 76% of our sample mentioned SDGs somewhere within their reporting suite, although disappointingly, only 24% go further than taking this to a cursory level, by actually demonstrating how they are contributing to some of the 169 targets that sit behind each of the 17 high-level statements and are designed to drive the goals. 80% of our sample were also aligned with or guided by one or more framework, with GRI and SASB being the most popular. Our final finding in this section regards climate disclosure and the TCFD recommendations in particular. Only 12% of companies still failed to adopt the recommendations this year, with 52% of companies now having reporting on this area for at least 2 years or more to some extent or other. The general quality of climate reporting reflects where companies are on their journey. Those who have been factoring in climate change risk for some time are well ahead and well prepared for the incoming regulations, whilst others are lagging. That said, a majority of companies have set some form of net zero target, indicating that this has moved from discussion into action in most cases. And this finding is supported by a noticeable change in ownership of climate risk, which in comparison to previous research appears to have shifted from the CSR or risk functions towards CEOs bearing ultimate responsibility for climate risk. In terms of the disclosure format, around 2/3 of companies chose to make their primary TCFD disclosure within their annual report, although the majority of these then provide additional information either on the website, in their sustainability report, or a combination of both. And the most common place to disclose this information within the annual report was in the sustainability section under the risk or the risk report. At present, only 12% of companies actually integrate disclosure across their reporting, suggesting that for most of this process was not yet fully embedded, something that we hope and expect to see evolve in the coming years. And now I'll hand over to Daryl to take you through our culture findings.
Thank you, Sue. Our next area centres on workplace culture and the fact that most companies really are now demonstrating this as a strategic imperative. The last year has seen a huge spotlight on people and culture as companies review this people strategy. They're interrogating their values from the new ways of working, focusing on talent, recovering and supporting people through furlough, starting to embrace and develop hybrid working, all while maintaining, in some cases, increasing employee engagement. So people and culture is definitely being given a significant level of focus by most companies. 60% of the reports we reviewed now contain a dedicated section focused on people or culture. And where this was not the case, most others included some detailed narrative surrounding this topic over and above what was required by regulation. Adding weight to this, 60% of companies also identify some sort of people, culture, or talent risk in their list of principal risks, often highlighting the importance of people strategy and their mitigating actions. In this example from GSK, they use their culture section to explain the importance of creating the right performance culture to support their strategy. They also go into some detail to explain how they monitor culture to ensure it's working and driving the right behaviours, and that disclosure sits across both the strategic and the governance reports. Which leads to our next finding, which is that in general, we've seen much more fulsome disclosure on culture monitoring. One of the most popular ways to do this remains through the engagement survey, with all of the companies reviewed conducting some sort of company-wide detailed review. And 32% of companies also spoke about additional pulse surveys, a number of which had been introduced during a response to the pandemic, either to gauge mood generally or to explore specific issues. Whilst we've seen better disclosure in this respect, what I would say is that board disclosure on exactly what is being monitored often remains opaque. An area in which we do see the transparent disclosure of work is workforce engagement, with the best reporters bringing this to life and demonstrating ownership from those designated with responsibility for this task. Money Supermarket, for example, included an interview with its non-exec director, Employee Champion, which presents the outcome of the process in a really accessible and authentic way. We also continue to see companies embed meaningful discussion of their values within communications, with 92% doing so. Glencore, for example, explained the work they've done in the year to reposition and embed their purpose, values, and code of conduct, as well as outline their culture index used to monitor culture on a regular basis. Many also showcase values in action, using case study examples to demonstrate this. A great example of this can be seen here in Ocado, who feature real-life scenarios from their staff to explain how values have acted as a guiding force during these challenging times and shaped the company's response to COVID. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is a topic which it goes very much hand in glove with culture and is a key part of any company's culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Given the spotlight of that topic of this year, for the purposes of this research, we've broken this out as a specific area and really pleased to say that we've noted a significant amount of positive intent in this space, but largely limited to companies starting a dialogue in this area. It's clear that this is an area of increasing focus for companies, with 72% mentioning diversity in their opening statements from the chair or CEO, and 74% of companies identifying diversity and inclusion as a material topic for the business in their materiality assessment. However, as you might expect, at present there is relatively little follow-through in this area in terms of evidencing progress against hard targets. In general, though, we're seeing more depth discussion on a range of diversity topics at an operational level. There's an ever-evolving subject area, and for many companies still, it's a relatively new area of focus, but some typical areas of disclosure include discussions of networks that companies have created or movements they have signed up to. Also in the ways that they're exploring the topic of DE&I with employees and facilitating discussion through mechanisms such as employee resource groups. The topic areas mentioned were broad though, including age, social background, sexual orientation, and disability, but by far the most common topics for discussion remain gender and ethnicity. Much of the discussion appears to be a precursor for companies actually setting out clear objectives and targets in this area. A notable number of companies have focused this year on developing a race action plan, as the rise in Black Lives Matter movement has really catapulted this issue and the subject of ethnic equality into the spotlight. Pearson talked in some detail about the work they are doing to promote education and learning, and also about its employee task force set up to derive actionable ways to improve inclusion, resulting in an action plan comprising 50 initiatives for implementation over the next 12 to 18 months. Others, such as Travis Perkins, explained how they made a commitment to the valuable 500, focused on equity for those with disability, recognising that diversity is a key to future success, and promised to set targets in the year ahead. But relatively few companies set out a clear diversity strategy. One that does is BAT, who present this as a standalone strategy rather than integrating it into its corporate strategy. They also support it with detailed diversity disclosures in their sustainability communications. What is clear is that boards need to do better to lead by example. Despite the requirement to publish board diversity strategy, in many cases, these are still relatively bland, and disclosures in this area do not really appear to be evolving at the rate we might hope. But it is encouraging to see that over half of companies discuss ethnic diversity of their board to some degree, although it's slightly disheartening to see that only 20% appear to have set goals in this area, and that many do not take this discussion much further than acknowledgement of the Parker Review. So now, Jo, back to our final section.
Thanks, Daryl. So our final section centres around the reporting network. But what exactly do we mean by the reporting network? Well, these days there's a real need for companies to be more considered in their communications to ensure that they produce the right level of information in the right format for those wanting to access it. And the FRC recently published a discussion paper called The Future of Corporate Reporting, in which they propose a new framework based on the idea of a reporting network. And in this, a series of reports would complement one another and focus on communicating relevant information to stakeholders based on accessibility, connectivity, and transparency. So in line with this idea, we are seeing signs of companies making smarter use of the communications ecosystem rather than simply trying to cram all the information they need or indeed want to disclose into a single document. And to that end, a majority of companies now produce some sort of supplementary reporting over and above that required by compliance. In fact, 80% of companies do so. And unsurprisingly, the most popular of these rise in a narrative sustainability report. And these can take many forms, from summaries a few pages long to tomes well over 100 pages. In addition to this, 36% of companies have also produced some sort of sustainability data book or index, and whether that's a standalone document or as an appendix to their narrative reporting. And that can really help audiences to access the data they want in the most efficient and easy way possible. And while in general we would support the production of audience-targeted supplementary information, it can be disheartening to see companies do this without proper thought. For example, 3 companies we looked at produced a sustainability report that was a direct lift of information found in their annual report, and this really adds little value. So the importance of layering information and cascading a consistent story needs to be of utmost consideration when preparing supplementary information. And a really nice example of this can be seen from CRH, who present summary level sustainability information in their annual report, which then crucially is consistent with the way in which they structure their sustainability report, where they provide a lot more detail. And their sustainability report is then also helpfully split out into a narrative piece and a data book to target different audience groups. And this joined up communication appears to actually reflect a joined up approach internally, highlighted by a detailed explanation they provide in their reporting regarding their materiality process and how it's integrated across business functions. Another key element of the reporting network, but one that is somewhat overlooked by many, is a company's corporate website. Surprisingly, relatively few of the companies we looked at really maximise this asset. Unilever were one of the companies that actually used that online real estate to clearly support their reporting around sustainability commitments. However, even this could have been used more effectively to show their progress by making better use of rich media such as video content. They also include a data hub where users can download data in Excel format, which again is useful, but again, perhaps inclusion of an interactive data hub would have been more effective and engaging. In addition to sustainability reporting, we've also observed a number of companies producing topic-specific reporting for the first time this year, in many cases. Most common areas included those with a climate focus or tax transparency and human rights angle. Given the impending TCFD regulations, climate reporting has gained traction with those industries, particularly those flagged as particularly exposed, such as extractives and financial services. And Glencore, for example, sets out its strategy to net zero along with other climate information in its first climate report. While BAT published a human rights report for the first time this year, clearly a significant issue for their industry, this focuses on the issues and initiatives they put in place across their entire supply chain. Barclays, on the other hand, produced its maiden D&I report, supporting the company's strong focus on culture. And Lloyds prepared a report focused on its engagement activities and the outcomes of that work, which helped to explain how they'd shaped their new priorities, which Sue's already touched on today. So if we think about where we started this conversation, talking about the sustainability odyssey, it really does seem that we've come a long way on this journey, and it's really positive to see so many of these topics traditionally associated with sustainability now being given such focus by businesses. And on that note, I'd like to leave you with a few closing thoughts about what these findings could mean to you in practice. So given the way in which these issues are overlapping, as sustainability issues become more and more embedded, it leaves companies with a challenge, but also an opportunity to tell a joined up story. But how do we ensure alignment and that communications are clear, credible, and consistent? And how do we present an authentic, holistic, yet tailored story for all those people who are interested in what we do, how we behave, and the impact we have? Well, in a nutshell, 3 things we believe you should keep front of mind to achieve that. Define your corporate narrative, so you have one version of the truth explaining who you are, what you stand for, and how you operate. Consider your audience needs, and part of that is by taking stakeholder engagement seriously. And use channels effectively. Really make the most of the tools you have at your disposal. And if you do those things, we believe you will achieve effective and streamlined communications. And whatever your issue or wherever you are on your journey, we're always here to help. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And please do get in touch if you have any specific queries or would like to follow up with us in any way. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So thanks for joining.